Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this edition of R&R's Ask the Expert. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Mark Springer. He is the president of Dayspring Restoration out in Montana. He's also the current RIA president, and there's a lot going on in the RIA right now and in the industry as a whole. So I am really excited to have some conversations about a number of things going on in the industry. So Mark, thank you so much for joining me. Tell us a little bit about the background of your company and your role in the industry.
No, absolutely, Michelle. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here with you today. It's always an honor to be a part of the things that R&R is doing and what you guys are really doing to advance the restoration industry. So thank you for that. Dayspring Restoration, like you said, we're based in Montana. We have 6 locations in Montana, about 130 people on our team spread across Montana. My dad started the company in 1989. In 1989, I was 11 years old. So I grew up in this industry. Throughout my high school years, I worked not by choice. I really worked by edict in the family business. And at that point, I really probably didn't appreciate what the business was and the sort of skills that I was building and the sort of character it was instilling in me at that point. In fact, if you'd asked me in high school what I want to do for a career, I would have probably told you anything except for Dayspring Restoration. But as I got older, the business was a very small business. My dad operated it throughout my high school years, and then up until the time I joined the company, it was just operated out of his home. He had a home office and a garage that stored his pretty modest restoration arsenal. Of course, the business there in the early 90s and up to the mid 90s was a very different industry. There's so many things that have changed as this industry has matured, but it was a great experience, and I was very privileged to be able to have a role in the company and then to be able to grow the business out of kind of college age up until where we are today, which is a very different business than I think my dad ever envisioned when he started it. So it's been quite a journey, but obviously very rewarding and fulfilling, and we've been able to build it with a lot of really great people in a great state that's probably a little different than what a lot of people experience. Montana's, kind of off the beaten path. We're a big state with not very many people, not a lot of COVID cases. We probably have fewer cases of COVID in months, and a lot of places have in a day. So we're very thankful to be here.
That is a good place to be. So before this call started, we were talking about how we are nearing the 75th anniversary of the Restoration Industry Association. And as the president, even before you were president, I've watched you play a big role in the RIA and kind of the path of the industry in some good ways. You wrote the Greatest Need article about a path that you hoped the industry would take moving forward and kind of lobbying for restorers, helping restorers find their voice. So I'm curious how you've seen the RIA evolve over your time in the industry and where you see it going from here. What is the RIA's role in today's industry?
Right. So I think RIA has an opportunity right now in the continuum that industry is experiencing with this maturation process. As I talked about how different things were back in the 90s and late 80s, the industry needs at that point were different. The way that we really operated our businesses were different. The challenges we had were different then for a variety of different reasons. But the association, as it is really went through its period of service to the industry, has met needs at different times. And I think some of those needs, if you go back even to the era where Marty King developed the Certified Restorer program in the late 70s and early 80s, that need for that sort of advanced designation at that time was probably the most important thing for the industry then. And so these men and women before me really met the needs of the industry at that time. And I think for us, for our board of directors and the leaders of RIA in the current era that we're in, and really going back, you kind of take this the second half of the 20 teens, right? So from 2010 to 2020, there's been a lot of things that have changed in our industry, the impact of technology in the industry, the way that insurance carriers embrace technology within that, the way that various other entities have come in to provide and add value to the restoration industry has changed. And so we really identified for the restoration contractors, which are our members, that they were not being represented within all of these changes that were happening. And this was really problematic for the restoration contractors. And my biggest concern from my vantage point on the board of directors was that the environment within what we call the restoration ecosystem was becoming increasingly misrepresented by contractors who, of course, have the biggest stake in this. I mean, we are the ones who have to go in and do this work. We are the ones who have to go in and make the customer happy. And to be able for, as they've had this promise made to them with their insurance policy, they have this belief that by buying this policy, if something ever happens, I'm going to be okay. And increasingly, the experience that they were having, that our customers were having, was not a good experience. And part of the reason for that is because the impact that the restoration contractors were experiencing within this ecosystem. And there were really kind of a couple of key areas that we saw this happening. One was with the estimating platforms that the contractors are using. Another was in the area of the third-party administrators. And then the third-party consultants, which also has become really one of the recent trends that we're seeing. And then the last area is in the area of the regulatory and legislative impact on our industry. And in all four of these areas, a contractor voice was not only small, but in many cases, it was entirely absent. And we believe that RIA is uniquely positioned to speak into this area and to be able to have a voice for the contractors and to be able to unify what is a very fragmented industry in a way that benefits the contractor, where it's not as though the contractor needs to only be the only voice or that their needs are the only ones that should be heard, but they certainly should be heard equally. And there's a lot of strategies around that, and that's where I think RIA has been able to really resonate with a lot of the experiences the contractors are having where that voice was absent.
Yeah. Okay. So along those lines, last week you just wrapped up a 3-part discussion with Exactware CEO Mike Fulton. There were a lot of good questions asked by you, asked by Katie Smith, who's the AGA chairwoman, asked by restorers, who then Katie was able to repeat and ask over the calls. There was a lot of discussion there. So what were some of the big takeaways you found from that discussion, and where does it go from here?
Right. It's an excellent question. So I'll talk first a little bit about what's really positive about this and why it's so important. Really, in the time that Exactware has been really the dominant player as an estimating platform in the restoration industry, there hasn't been a real cohesive discussion with Exactware, where the needs of a lot of contractors are really being distilled down to the most important issues. And we're having a discussion with them at a very high level about how those issues are being addressed. Most of the discussion happening with Exactware is some interaction at trade shows. You know, someone would have a challenge maybe with the platform and they have a one-off discussion, or kind of all these different isolated discussions without being able to boil this down. And so last year, after the formation of the AGA, of course, the number one issue that was a priority, not based on what we thought, but based on the feedback from the RA members, is that the challenges that were exponentially increasing within the platform, within the pricing platform, really Exactware was one of the central challenges there. And there's a number of reasons why those challenges were central. And boiling it all down, it became evident that one of the main challenges is that labor prices within the database were not changing or being updated really in a way that was reflecting what we as contractors were experiencing in our markets. So I'll just use restoration labor, for example. Restoration labor is, as for contractors, our biggest cost. You know, as restoration contractors, material costs, on certainly the mitigation side, I'm not speaking about the repair side, but on the mitigation side, labor is our biggest cost. And when we looked at the the kind of over time graph of what restoration labor was doing, it was really staying flat. And there's a variety of reasons why it was flat. And it gets back to just some challenges within Xactware's methodology. And so we had a really talented group of people that have volunteered their time for the advocacy and government affairs. When we talk about AGA, it's advocacy and government affairs. Within that committee, there's a subcommittee of for estimating and pricing. Some really, really talented and knowledgeable professionals spent many of their time volunteering to bring this information to us to be able to have a discussion with Xactware about these challenges we're facing. And kudos to Xactware, they engaged with us in this discussion. And really one of the starting points of this was in January. Myself and at that point the president of RIA, Lee King, we flew down to Xactware's headquarters, and we had a full day to really report to them what our members were telling us and what we were finding as we researched this issue. And we really had a lot of concerns. We had a lot of concerns that contractors were not being represented and that there were issues with their platform that were not yielding results that met what we experienced in the real world. And again, I just give credit to Xactware for listening to us. And they immediately, I mean, there was, obviously we're telling them there's problems with their platform. And I think anyone who says, we've got a problem with your product or service, it's sometimes tough to hear, right? But again, I credit Mike Fulton for listening and for engaging and saying, okay, we want to work through this with you. And then, of course, within a pretty short period of time, this big, huge thing happened, and we had COVID. And it really kind of affected a lot of the time frame that we had to be able to impact this, because we intended to integrate them into the discussion that we had in our annual convention. It was scheduled for April in New Orleans. And what happened instead was what you referred to is this really three-part discussion, 3.5 hours of discussion that has been public. It's been something that a lot of restoration contractors have involved themselves in. They've been difficult discussions. I mean, I've felt in every one of these discussions we have, I feel like I've got 1 million pounds on my back, as we have these discussions. But as we've done that, it's went well, because we've got, although sometimes I don't think we got necessarily the answer we wanted, Xactware is in an interesting place. They have this huge customer demographic of restoration companies and this huge customer demographic of of insurance carriers. And those two are kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. And they're in the middle of this. And I think that's a tough place for any product or service to be. And so as they've done that, though, they have responded to the concerns we have. And I think really the big takeaways with kind of that background in place are, number one, Xactware has enormous resources that I don't think contractors are using, and we have to use these. They have white papers about things that include pricing, include overhead and profit, include how pricing is set. And if we as contractors don't have that information, you can't have a discussion with the carrier that you're doing pricing for. But it's, again, very important restoration contractors understand who your customer is. For my company, our customer is the insured who has the property damage. My customer is not the insurance company. And although we need to have very transparent operations around how we price, we can't just charge whatever we want, we have to remember my obligation is to the property owner or the insured. And the obligation here within this contract is there. And if we remember and we operate from that position, I think it solves a lot of these problems. And I think Mike reinforced that as we had these discussions. But there's a lot of information. That's number one. If you don't use that information, you can't price properly. Second piece of information that was really a takeaway from this is that it's important that you understand pricing in your market. Pricing is not just what Xactware says. If you don't pick up the phone and have a dialogue, and Mike made it very clear, we have the pricing specialist here who were willing to work with you on this. And in my company's experience, that's exactly what we've done. We pick up the phone, we get on the phone with them and have a discussion with them and a dialogue with them about what we're experiencing in our local market. If contractors think, and a lot of contractors have a sense of guilt, like I don't do enough estimate uploads, so therefore I can't complain about pricing. They need to stop that. They need to recognize that's not the problem. We don't do enough uploads. We could never do enough uploads to impact pricing. The thing that we have to do is understand pricing in your market, understand your costs that you as a company have, and make sure that you are having discussions with Xactware about those specific issues. And if you do that, it will impact the price in your market and will begin to reflect what you actually have in that marketplace. And one of the things that was so important in this discussion is that Mike said, Mark, as we've had these discussions, we've learned a lot, and it has changed the way that we approach our methodology. And as a result, anyone who looks at a labor price list for June of 2020 will find that the price has radically changed to reflect the market, not based on just what we think, oh, we want to see you raise prices, but raised based on the data. And this is a win. I can't overstate how big of a win this is for restorers. You know, if an average restoration company does $2 million in revenue and the price changes by 5%, that's a $100,000 impact in 1 year. And I think that what we've done here through this process has moved the needle in a massive way that's unprecedented. And that's why we need people to be a part of what's happening here, because the impact is monumental. And if people don't engage with it, it won't be sustainable. And that's why it's so important.
Perfect. Okay, so that conversation is going to keep moving forward. So anybody who's watching this, stay up to date on restorationindustry.org. That's the RIA's website. They have an AGA section on there where you can see what's going on and watch past conversations if you're a member. Some are available to non-members, but most of them you do need to be a member. It's worth it to join. Right. You can also check, I try to post updates on R&R as well and on our Facebook page and stuff like that. So stay up to date with those as that's constantly evolving. Okay, so looping back to a previous question, you talked a little bit about advanced designations and education in the industry, and that's something that the RIA has really moved forward with in the last few years as well. There's been the certified restorer and the certified mold professional and the WLS, the water loss specialist, but now there are these new designations with contents and fire and all of that. So what does that look like moving forward, and why is it so important for restorers to pursue these, maybe in addition to IICRC, WRT, ASD, those kinds of, more common, I think, certifications that people find?
So IICRC and RIA now have interfaced together in a way that benefits the industry. This didn't happen for decades. It's unfortunate that it didn't happen for decades, but it's happening now. So all of the training that IICRC has now fits within this larger path that helps to elevate the industry. And this is really what's critical for part of RIA's mission. Part of our mission is to not only advocate for the industry, but also to elevate the industry. IICRC is a great organization for certification, and we now work together in tandem with them for that certification. But one of the issues that we have as an industry is some perception. And some of the perception that people have about our industry is that there's really low barriers to entry. You can go get a 2-day course and now all of a sudden you're a water restoration professional. Any of us who've been operating in this industry for a period of time know that is so far from the truth that it is really striking what it takes to become a professional in this industry. And so RIA has, in these advanced designations, part of a path to a level of professionalism that really gives our customers, the end user, a product that they are paying for when they buy their insurance policy. And, if your property is impacted by water damage, for example, just having someone come in and remove water isn't what you're paying for. You're paying for someone to come into your property and to be able to make sure that all the elements of that loss are returned back to pre-loss condition. And that means that you have all of these elements of that project that include the structural repairs, the environmental concerns that you may come into contact with, the contents restoration. The list goes on, that if you don't have a full understanding of this industry, you're really doing the customer a disservice. And so as you get those ICRC certifications, the entry certifications, you then are able to build up to the point that you can get these advanced designations that are going to allow you to be able to deliver a service to the customer that is exponentially better than just the baseline of knowledge. And that's what will differentiate you from someone that isn't a professional in this industry. And then ultimately up to the point that you can get a CR. And really these, we call them pillar designations: water loss specialist, fire loss specialist, contents loss specialist, and environmental restoration specialist. All four of those then qualify you to get the CR. And all of this is being done in tandem with IICRC now. We're working together to make sure that when someone gets on this path, they can get to that point in a way that's understandable, achievable. It's going to take some time, but it's totally achievable.
I love it. That's great. I love to see the IICRC and the RA working together. There are big things happening.
We love it too, and mostly because it works well for restorers.
Yeah.
If we benefit restorers through that relationship, we're doing the right thing.
IICRC has done a lot of evolving as well in the last few years, and so I feel like the industry's in a really good place to be working together and for restorers to elevate, like you have said.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, anything else you want to add to the conversation? Anything we haven't talked about? Any more points that you missed?
No, I think this is, again, Michelle, we just appreciate all of your support from a media side and helping getting this information out to restorers. It's so helpful, and we appreciate how you champion these sort of things. I think the last thing, I'll just to kind of close that last statement, is that the property restoration industry is moving into a really great place, but we're not there yet. And the worst thing I think that could happen is for people to be like, oh, we have this AGA effort now, RA and ICRC are working together, we got these new certifications, things are good. That's not the case. And we can't be complacent. We have so many great places that we can move this industry to. And our vision is that people would get off of the sidelines and participate in that process. We are only as good as the volunteers that we bring into this industry. And sometimes people, I mean, I hear the most frustrating things sometimes when people say, yeah, I'm just kind of waiting to see how this turns out. And then, you know, if it's good, then maybe we'll jump in. And people need to stop that thinking. They need to become an RIA member. If they become an RIA member, they can get these advanced training and designation. They can interact with very high-level professionals, and then they can participate in this process of making sure that our industry is sustainable and that it's going to be better than what we can leave it better than we found it. And that's what I always try to encourage people in is, listen, if you get off the sideline and we can leave this thing better than we found it, then we've really achieved something. And so I hope people will join us in that process.
Lots of wisdom there. Lots of quotes that I'm going to pull out a lot of quotes from there. That was really good. Well,
I probably stole them from somebody else. So
anyway.
All right, Michelle, thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Mark. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you much.